Hello, I'm Sharella, and I am passionate about keeping marriages strong and satisfying. It literally breaks my heart to see families torn up and couples quietly struggling, spouses trying to be strong when they feel so alone, emotionally divorced. I have studied the top experts in marriage, learning methods to build a more vibrant relationship. But more importantly, I have applied my learning and skills to a marriage of 26 years plus, the latest 4 years happily, and pass my learning and experiences in the trenches on to you. The topics we cover will be stone face, fades to smiley, from anger and hurt to understanding, honoring 5 emotions of anger, fear, sadness, disgust, and joy, real love and real honesty, is cited to arise emotional processing, plus the place of empathy. 5 emotional intimacy fears. Scale of threes, managing emotions. The integral element of faith in self, others, and God. And lastly, your 5 stories. In this course, you'll be able to identify and understand stuffed emotions through a hands-on project. Yes, colorful markers. Separate primary and secondary emotions using specifically designed activities, including a life-changing meditation and a processing model to improve marriage. Banish fear through learning how to be an emotional lantern. Consider emotional maturity age. Produce a visual reminder for the most important joy question. Practice notice it, name it, flip it, find it. Engage in an honest conversation in marriage, maybe for the first time. Learn how to avoid stone face, anxiety, and addictions. Compile a fun and actionable method for managing emotions forever. You will benefit most from this course if you are married, but it can still be helpful for someone at the considering marriage stage or for someone who wants to better understand the value and reprocessing of emotions. As we'll be taking a deep dive into emotional regulation in marriage, you'll identify most with the content if you are an emotional avoider and stuffer. But again, we surround the topic of emotions in marriage, so you'll certainly still find support. Thanks for allowing me to share with you this Love Zone marriage course, Commotion Emotion. I invite you to check out my other courses as well. We'll see you inside. I'm going to describe a condition that affects many people, its symptoms, its side effects, and treatment plan follow. It starts with excitement and a zeal for life. But as that excitement and zeal is expressed outwardly, those with this condition realize others may not be accepting their outward expression as they hope. So the next step is conformment/confinement, meaning to bring into accord or agreement. This may be at the surrender of what the subject values. But if it seems to improve things outside herself, she continues in this trajectory. Next comes bearing false witness, otherwise known as lying, or its kinder younger sister, deceiving. Followed by tight controlling as an effort at all costs to maintain safety and sense of self. What can exhibit at this point is a loss of mental reasoning, not continuing in good judgment. Needless to say, this person lives in a very negative state of mind, even if they can convince themselves they are doing what's best and that they are perfectly normal and fine. In fact, other people consider this subject an enigma, one to be avoided because they can't be figured out. The subject appears pleasant and whole, but exudes a spirit of misleading and delusion. Paradoxically, the next symptom manifests, but is only recognized when prodded by an outside source, the condition seemingly in remission, but remaining hidden indefinitely. But when finally prodded and poked at, a monster emerges. The monster reveals, can't cope, caught in a corner, 20-foot high wall of emotions with no outlet. Once prodded, The subject seems to have no recourse, no release. And when the wall of emotion begins to crack, it's an ugly, horrendous beast. The diagnosis for this condition? Stone face. But don't worry, there is hope. Even those who have found themselves in this quietly emotional dead condition can be revived to new life and wonderful new possibility, both for self and marriage. Let's go. Let's do a little exercise. I want you to think back to a time you experienced a lot of emotion, both good or bad, or in between. Maybe bearing a child, or a bad breakup, or participating in a joyful event. Do you remember specifics of that time? Who was with you? What were you eating or smelling? The sounds you experienced. Do you remember something especially poignant or funny or outstanding at that time? Let's say your experience was bad and you cried until there were no more tears left to cry. Do you remember that all dried up feeling? Do you remember words that were said or read around that time? What else do you remember? Be specific. Write it down if you'd like to. Now, can you remember what you had for dinner 7 days ago? If you're like me, there's a good chance you cannot. But I can specifically remember going logging with my family, hearing my dad whir up the chainsaw to cut trees for firewood, twirling my arms and body round and round in the tall pine trees and feeling the sunlight on my 4-year-old face and the smell of wood, having the rare privilege of drinking root beer on that outing, the whole can to myself. I remember thinking, I will never forget this day. And I haven't. Those things brimming with emotion, both good and bad, are the things stored in our heart and mind. Even decades, maybe a lifetime later. Emotions play an important part of our existing, and especially in our relationships. And guess what? I still absolutely love the smell of fresh cut wood. Amanda had just learned the Marie Kondo magic of tidying up system. She took months to clean out her closets, thankfully parting with things no longer used and connecting intimately with each item in her house to see if it, in fact, sparked joy. She tackled the last gargantuan task, the library. Her household library looked nothing like famed libraries she'd read about in Victorian Regency homes or seen in the movies, with the perfectly categorized and colored collections, the fireplace on one end with the bay window on the other, a globe of the world and carved chess set smartly arranged on a round table over a cozy rug, and of course the moving ladder that reached 3 stories to get to the less used but prized publications. Her library sat stuffed to the brim, books wedged into tight spaces, family photos waiting for a home, and notebooks from various classes laid horizontally askance to the vertical volumes beneath. It was time to tackle the title's tangle. So she dove in, ditching chronicles and fairy tales, parting with beleaguered binders, and conceiving a new method to arrange and tame her tomes. In her newly inspired system, she would lay stacks of books perpendicular to each other, horizontal stack to vertical stack to horizontal stack to vertical, to the end of the shelf. No bookends needed. A puzzle of sorts. Brilliant, she conceded. 3 weeks and countless hours later, she beheld her literary masterpiece, a beautifully arranged media center. Except for one large, ugly, brown, expandable file, full of various maps of the places her family had visited or would like to visit. The fatigued file belonged to her husband, James. The next day, as she hauled book boxes out to begin their new life, James passed the library with barely an acknowledging look. Amanda cornered him. "Did you see what I did to the library? I'm so happy with this room now, except that old dusty map file of yours. Could you please go through it, or better yet, just dump it?" With a fiercely protective look, James defended, "No, I want to keep every single map." Amanda countered, "At least you can go through it." James tightened his folded arms as he repeated, "No, I want to keep every single map." Incredulously, Amanda supplied, "Do you know how many books and binders and paper stuffs I've lugged away? Do you know how long this has taken me? I've parted with more than half the content in this library. I only kept the books that sparked joy." Again, James declared, "No, I want to keep every single map." Weeks of dammed up motivation and effort spilled forth from Amanda. "What? You mean I've done all this cleaning out and you won't help me with one simple expandable file?" "James, you can't take away my maps, and in fact, I will take them away, and I will store them right next to our bed." Amanda blew a gasket. "Not next to our bed indefinitely. Just go through this stupid thing and let's be done with this." James grabbed the file and vehemently countered, "No," and did just as he said he would. And hence a pattern began. Amanda would think, "Well, I know he won't part with his old cassette tapes, so I'll store them untouched and unconsidered in the attic. Same for his collection of ball caps and cowboy boots, and anything that comes along of that same nature." This continued until Amanda and James learned about hard and soft emotions. Amanda, hard emotion: "I did all this work and you don't appreciate it." Soft emotion: "I feel taken advantage of for all the unseen work I do." James, hard emotion: "I will keep every single map and will definitely not go through the file." Soft emotion: "You are not aware of what I most treasure, and sometimes I want to do things my way." When they sat down months later and had the soft emotion talk about the library and maps file, their hearts softened. And even more, they stepped up to a new level. "I see you more than I did before, and I honor you for who you are." Hard and soft emotions are just like an egg. Seems pretty hard on the outside, but all mushy and pliable on the inside. Understanding hard and soft emotions sets up a marriage with a deeper understanding, and hence ability to deal more gracefully and effectively with emotions as you learn to get to the heart of what's really going on. Well, there are 6 basic emotions as found by the research of Paul Ekman, evidenced by micro-expressions that exhibit our true feelings before we even recognize we've given the facial expression: fear, anger, disgust, happiness, sadness, and surprise. Emotions are a natural response. Emotion is an integration of physiological responses, meaning-making or beliefs, and action tendencies. These ideas are from Debbie and Becca Jorgensen, Susan Johnson EFT experts. These 3 components mean: 1, our bodies react and create physical responses of emotion; 2, our mind creates thought that produces an emotional response; and 3, our actions evidence our emotions. We have an urge to carry out certain expressive or instrumental behaviors. For example, the action tendency of fear involves an urge to escape, and that of anger involves an urge to attack. When your brain learns to harness thoughts and live more in the positive, it begins to see the why of what you do in a split second, so that you'll take the action that morphs the chemical reaction into something favorable and in your best interest. Put simply, emotion is energy in motion. Emotions are a barometer of inner well-being to tell whether you are honoring self and your values. We'll talk in the next section about how honoring emotions is like riding the ebb and flow of a wave. Ultimately, emotional regulation is about taking back your power. That's it. Even though it's a natural process to experience emotions on this earthly journey, One of the biggest challenges we face is not giving our rightful power away to others in the face of potential emotional overreactions. For our purposes here, we will talk about selective emotions, especially those that cycle in marriage issues. We begin with our authentic selves, yet through experiences and background and so forth, what I'll call love zone emotion fades. Authenticity, our real self, fades, F-A-D-E-S, through unmanaged fear, anger, disgust, embarrassment, and sadness. These uncontrolled emotions keep you from moving forward personally and relationally. Fear of loss and failure, a concept I learned from Kim Giles, often leads to the second emotion of anger. Disgust and embarrassment are fairly similar responses depending on the situation, and sadness is the end of the line. When everything fades, sadness is left standing. Think of a small child. They're authentic until they become afraid. Then they respond through anger, disgust, or embarrassment until they are sad, and you can't figure out why. But they continue on with inauthentic patterns that shape them for life. And then it goes from broken heart to numbness, nothingness, avoidance, imploding, stone face. Have you ever heard of that love story of Shmiley, S-H-M-I-L-Y? When I first heard this story, I thought it was a little goofy and immature, but as I continue in marriage, it seems to hold more importance to me now. The story goes that from the time Laura's grandparents met each other, they played their own special game. The goal of their game was to write the word Schmiley in a surprise place for the other to find. They took turns leaving Schmiley around the house, and as soon as one of them discovered it, it was his or her turn to hide it once more. They dragged Schmiley with their fingers through the sugar and flour containers to await whoever was preparing the next meal. They smeared it in the dew on the windows and steam on the mirror. This continued for decades, all the way until Grandma's funeral. Schmiley was scrawled in yellow on the pink ribbons of Laura's grandmother's funeral bouquet. See how much I love you. Story told by Laura Jeannie Allen. From fades to Schmiley, your marriage can be like this too, with managed emotions and changed perspectives, from contempt to joy, and from barely living to boldly loving. So let's do an activity. This is drawing an emotion. So you'll need to have some paper in front of you. And as we do this activity, start with something not too intense, just something to be playful with a little bit. So think of a recent triggering situation and identify an emotion that came with it. Put your hand on your heart and say what you are feeling. For example, sad. So now take your paper and draw an image on the paper with the effects of this emotion. How would it look drawn on paper? So I might draw a drooping plant on my paper. What action or sound would this emotion make? So write something that depicts this action or sound. So I might draw some arrows that go from bigger to smaller with little sigh marks around it, like it's sighing in sadness. Where do you feel it in your body? Does it have a color, a texture? Is it moving or still? I would say that my plant is kind of a Ninja Turtle green, slippery, and falling. What is the intensity of the emotion out of 10? 10 being the most intense. Write that number on your page. I might write 7. What thoughts come up with this emotion? You may have a few. Mine might be, I try so hard, but I still feel inadequate. Let it move through you, and if you aren't liking it, wad up that paper and throw it away from you. Or when you do this later without paper, throw it into a mental garbage can. Identification of emotion is the first and integral step to dealing with it. We'll talk much more about the various emotions in the next section. Inside out anger. One time in my life when I was having a difficult time processing emotions, I wondered why we even need emotions. They can be so complicated and overwhelming. Well, one day I was reading a new novel, and here was the opening scene. A man with a whip approached an area where a lot of people were congregated, and he started pushing over tables and yelling at people, swinging his whip all around. I wondered if maybe we were starting this book with the villain in the opening scene of the story, a guy with a lot of unspent emotion coming out in a violent way. And indeed, I judged, man, this guy needs to get a hold of himself. He's losing it. Well, the author did exactly what he hoped of, setting up the description of my biggest hero ever, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ in the temple, cleansing the temple and clearing out the money changers and business people who were defiling his Father's house. I think this scene clearly represents that emotions are okay and useful. And even though this anger emotion seemed extreme, it was to show those people in the wrong place how much Jesus cared about the sacredness of his temple. Do you remember the movie Inside Out by Pixar? Well, Joy tries to keep sadness, fear, anger, and disgust out of Riley's tween-age girl life. In the end, sadness and the other emotions has to play her part in order for Riley to find joy. So, the emotions: anger, fear, sadness, disgust, and joy. We've taken away happy and surprised from the basic emotions, and embarrassed, as it's really included in fear, from the last section to simplify things here. Anger. I'm going to define anger as a secondary reaction to other problematic emotions. Remember hard and soft emotions from the first of this course? That's what we're talking about here. That anger, the hard emotion, is a disguise for hurt or fear or other quieter emotions. These are the soft emotions. People can bottle up their emotions for years. Then, what feels like out of nowhere, they burst into tears of frustration, sadness, and anger. No matter how hard they try to hold it in, the pressure just becomes too much. Many have said that while blowing up may feel better for a minute, they only release it temporarily. And even worse, it's usually explosive, leaving you frustrated by loss of dignity and self-control. How often do you feel like a shaken pop bottle? Anger can result from feeling loss of control. Anger is often caused by an obstacle blocking a goal. Anger protects us. John Gottman, relationship expert, asserts that anger hides raw emotion. How vulnerable do you really want to be in a situation? It can just be easier to default to anger. Shoulds, thinking that you should do something, propagate anger, and anger builds defensiveness. Just knowing all this validates your feelings and actions of anger. You've heard it said, it takes two to fight. Can you be curious about emotions and what they are telling, both of spouse and of yourself? What could make me, him, so mad? What could make me, him, so sad? How is this not even about who the emotion is directed at? When the other person is mad, we could choose to feel peaceful, amused, or compassion. It's our choice to delegate our emotions to others, and we can become defensive or not. When we react to other bad emotions in others, we are mirroring them. Anger shows boundaries two ways. One, that boundaries are being crossed, and two, that a boundary is blocking what you want, perhaps through someone else's over-control. Anger can indicate how boundaries are working. You can refer to boundaries in some of my other courses, including Love Zone Marriage Class 2, Converting Self. The story at the first of this class with Jesus Christ showed boundaries being crossed, how others were polluting what he cared so much about. I remember once talking to a friend who had written a successful marriage book about a lot of annoyance I was feeling, irritated and easily bothered, and she explained to me I was experiencing sideways anger. We use sideways anger when we feel shameful for being angry, she explained. It's just a nice form of anger, but it ends up eating us up inside until we actually deal with it. Sideways anger shows up as irritation, annoyance, passive aggressiveness, joking, criticism, laughing at, not with, sarcasm, pretending, minimizing. Anger through resentment comes from perceived unfairness. If you experience sideways anger, just remember, it's disguised but unmanaged anger. Anger danger. Often at its roots, anger is driven by fear. Your brain is signaling that you are in danger, and your defenses must be activated. Fight or flight kicks in. Alana Gordon, licensed marriage family therapist, says interpreting anger as fear can allow us to get to the bottom of the issue faster instead of getting stuck in draining resentments. Asking yourself this question, what am I afraid of, will serve as a catalyst for moving forward. Let's ponder. Do you believe there is always hurt or sadness under anger? Some say there are exceptions. When do you think anger is actually a primary emotion? In the next section, we'll talk about fear and other emotional reactions. One step into the dark. Fear can be simply defined as by Kim Giles, author, speaker, and coach, as concern of loss or failure. Fear is essentially giving your power away or not relinquishing where it belongs. Kajai Motojiro says, one evening I noticed a man like me without a lantern walking farther up the road. I saw him because his figure suddenly appeared in the illuminated space in front of a solitary house. The man, his back turned to the light, gradually receded into the darkness and vanished. I watched the entire scene moved in a strange, singular way. Stirred by the man's disappearing figure, I thought, in a short time I'll be walking into the darkness just like him. If someone were to stand here observing, they'd probably see me vanish the same way he did. To others, it would be equally shocking, cheering, and instructive. From Picture Scroll of Darkness, quoted by Scott Miller. Do you remember what you were doing March 13th, 2020? I believe I will always remember that day. It was the day church and schools and life, it felt like, was indeterminately shut down due to the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. I found myself, after listening to news reports of doom and gloom, in a panic state I'd never experienced before, watching a map of the spread of the disease, seeing my email inbox fill with hype of why I needed to buy their product. When was coronavirus going to hit my state? Nothing was ever going to be the same again. Do you remember the thoughts and feelings you had at that time? Once I managed my panic and felt spiritual reassurance that all would be fine and everything was working out perfectly, my kids and I took a trip, with newly donned masks, to Walmart. We had a fun, lighthearted experience of gawking at the empty shelves and taking photos to send to loved ones. What a wonderful feeling to know we were prepared and all right. Yes, I already had a few cases of TP stuck in the attic. I must admit, I've generally had a lot of fear and anxiety in my mind, whether I could recognize it or not. I have found that I had to turn and face fears if I was ever going to get and be what I really wanted in life. To turn and look it in the eyes. I began my fear-busting journey by going to stay somewhere overnight, alone. Not like a haunted mansion or anything, just at one of my parents' empty houses. I found I had to let go of fear-mongering friends and resources. Do I really want to dip into conspiracy theories? I looked for and found a job when I didn't think I could after decades of housewife and homemaker. Probably the hardest thing I did while conquering fear was tell my husband no, so that I could have my own yes. You never know if doing so might get you kicked out on your hiney out in the street. Do you hear that old fear language once so part of me and my thinking? Fear had definitely been inserting itself into my potentially happy way of living, and I gave my personal power to it. Listen to the ways we give away our power. Anger, upset, blaming, pain, revenge, lack of focus, self-pity, envy, helplessness, uncertainty, impatience, joylessness, fatigue, intimidation, controlling others, obsessiveness, addictions, judgments, disappointment. When you see disappointment on the list, you might think that it's normal and natural to experience disappointment. But so often we increase our disappointment unwittingly by getting stuck in it so that we lose power. Someone in your life makes what you think are bad choices, and you become disappointed by what you think will make them ultimately disappointed, and you're unnecessarily disappointed by your interpretation of their bad choices and your bad feelings about it. You lose twice, relinquishing personal power. Or you could decide to be happy they're figuring things out on their own and go along your merry way. Susan Jeffers, in her excellent book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, divides fear choices into 3 sections. Each section has a pain or power choice. As you see on this slide, you can ride the scale from pain to power, or somewhere in between. So how do you hold fear? 1, helplessness or choice. 2, paralysis or action. Or 3, depression or excitement. It's your choice how you hold the pain or power lantern. And remember, fear and pain do hold a space. But are you stuck in it? What do you want more than what's holding you back? It helps to have a statement you can tell yourself when you feel fear stopping you. Here are some of my fear mantras. Whatever happens, I'll handle it. This blank is how I will handle this fear should it happen. I don't have to know all the answers now. I'll correct along the path just like maneuvering a bike. I push through the discomfort now, not looking at what may never result. What do you tell yourself that helps you keep moving forward? Julie Hanks, author of The Burnout Cure and marriage therapist, encourages clients and readers to be a lantern. A lantern is someone who has their emotional feet securely planted on the ground and are difficult to knock over. She continues, much like a hurricane lantern, their light remains steady and strong even in the midst of a tempest. There is a calmness about them as they hold up a metaphorical light to notice what's going on in any given situation as they make fair-minded assessments without hasty or unwarranted judgments. When a lantern gets upset, they don't ignore it but deal with it as a tool for further understanding themselves and others. Being a lantern is a difficult stance and requires some refueling in order to take care of others. A well-maintained lantern is ready and able to shine when others need it most. But what about when I just seem to default to fear? Well, remember what God says about our spirits. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That's found in 2 Timothy 1:7. God's plan for us wasn't to come to this life riddled with fear. He sent us here with power, love, and a sound mind. So anything else isn't God sent. If you think you've blown God's plan for your life, rest in this. You, my beautiful friend, are not that powerful. From Lisa Bevere. You must learn to walk to the edge of the light, and then a few steps into the darkness. Then the light will appear and show the way before you. From Harold B. Lee. Do you remember the story of the man at the first of this section who showed up under the light of the lantern but would disappear between into the darkness? Each time he reappeared, he could be seen as emerging each time as something stronger. Lanterns along the way are a chance for change. Quote, I said to my soul, be still and let the dark come upon you, which shall be the darkness of God. As in a theater, the lights are extinguished for the scene to be changed. From T.S. Eliot. Think of a situation, especially in marriage, where you feel fearful. Maybe it's setting a boundary and declaring what you need to refill yourself. Maybe it's having the courage to leave. Maybe it's opening your heart to your spouse, which could bring potential rejection. Then ask yourself, where do I lack faith such that I go to fear? What fears have you faced in your marriage to create change? Was it worth it? Ultimately, perfect love casteth out fear. So how do you increase perfect love? You can have self-compassion, because then you have love for others. And when you learn to love yourself, as you love others, the second great commandment as found in Matthew 22 of the Bible, then you're able to understand God's love. You can pray to fill your heart with God's love. His love is always stronger than fear, and you have access to that power through a simple prayer. The emotions of sadness, disgust, and joy. We've just talked about fear, a concern over loss or failure, giving your power away or not relinquishing it to where it belongs. Our motivations are highly influenced by our emotions. Emotions are information about ourselves. They help us, even if they show up as undesirable. So next is sadness, or expectations not met. In marriage, where does sadness serve you? Think about it for a sec. Sadness can make you more creative and convincing. It can make you more generous, more motivated, especially in revenge. It can make you less negatively judging and more socially sensitive. What sufferers don't like to commiserate together? How often do you choose into the pleasure of a sad song, or a sad movie, or a sad book? I remember one time in college listening to Billy Joel's Piano Man on repeat maybe 30 times, and it perfectly fit my mood of thinking about the boy I liked who barely knew I existed. Get this definition of love: the junction of joy and sorrow. The trick is not getting stuck in sadness and not using it manipulatively as a victim with no power. Sadness can get you the attention you want, good or not. The story is told of Jeff, a man who had an addiction to video gaming and had since he was 10. Jeff had been married to Josie for 15 years, most of which were rocky. It took him years of therapy to realize that gaming was his go-to for his unmanaged sadness, an unproductive self-soother, as it also alienated him from his wife. But get this, Jeff would approach Josie and tell her he was sad in this marriage, that she wasn't doing enough for him to feel good about himself, so he would game instead. And when he tried to stop excessive gaming, he couldn't stand the deep, sharp, painful sadness driven right into his very heart. And she was the problem. First off, can you see that she was absolutely not the problem? Jeff was blaming and shaming Josie, which is manipulative, and manipulative is never a good way to gain true intimacy. Shaming side note. Emotions can be misleading if shame is guiding them. Shame is believing something is inherently wrong with you, and emotions will default to the negative living in that brain space, which doesn't make you fun to live with, and vice versa for your spouse. I've heard it said that if one spouse is living in shame, the other likely is too. It becomes a habit, even if that's just the vibe they send off, back and forth. And shame is hard to identify, especially in self. I speak more on shame in my other courses. With Jeff and Josie, yes, Jeff's expectations were not being met, but they were really born of his own actions and reactions, giving up his rightful personal control to an external source, Josie, who may or may not respond how he hopes, her choice. And secondly, it was fine to claim he was sad by his expectations not being met, though Josie certainly didn't need to take the blame, but yielding to yet another source of external control, addiction, is never going to get a handle on the source of sadness. Jody Moore, my mentor and life coach, says, "You can't be sad enough to make another happy. You both struggle when you dip into another's sadness." If you share your sadness, there is a fine line of dumping it onto the other person, say your spouse. But it's really up to the receiver of your expressed emotions to take it on themselves or not. This is balancing your empathy, where you acknowledge their pain or happiness, but you don't get wrapped up in it. It's not jumping into the hole the sad person is stuck in, only to get stuck too. Even though the scriptures say to mourn with those who mourn and comfort those who stand in need of comfort, It doesn't do you both good to have you both overreactive to the other's emotions. I'll never forget the day I came to a stark realization about my marriage. My husband and I were talking our cycle talk, the one that goes round and is always the same sentences back and forth, and you never seem to find solutions. Well, here we were at it again, heated words back and forth. I remember turning away from him, and the thought, I have no doubt God's Spirit whispered to me, you are not accepting him for not accepting you. I almost asked out loud, what? Then I remembered my last sentence to my spouse. Why can't you just accept me as I am? I could see it crystal clearly. I want him to accept me as I am, however that shows up, and I am not accepting him for not accepting me. So who is in the wrong here if I allow myself to not accept him and expect something different from him to accept me? I laid all my cards down and turned to him with new eyes. I could sense in him a crabby tantrum toddler who just wanted what they wanted, but what they really needed was a nap. I felt a gush of compassion for him, just trying to assert what he wanted and knowing that when I've been the mom to a crabby 3-year-old, you don't punish them for that outburst at you because they couldn't have the candy at the checkout line. You cuddle them and help them calm down, loving them all the while. You don't let your toddler mistreat you, but you don't take it personally either. This is what taking back your power looks like. I see that you're upset with me. I am sorry that you're upset, but I will do what is true to me and do all I can to love you in the meanwhile. Loving my spouse as myself, as the second great commandment commands. And I trust you to figure out your stuff in your own power. If you'll remember class 2 in the Love Zone Marriage Converting Self, I talked about codependency, only being okay if the other spouse is okay. Here's an example of where you don't get wrapped up in their stuff. This conversation can be only in your thoughts, but it is still as powerful. From here on out, I felt new power as I am. When he complained, I thanked him for the information and said I would consider it, but not always do what he wanted for the sake of compliance. Compliance does not breed intimacy. Paradoxically, I found as I accepted me for who I am, he accepted me for who I am, and I was accepting him as is. And he was much calmer, like that toddler climbing onto your lap to snuggle as you read him a bedtime story. As a side note, we each have an emotional maturity separate from our biological age. You've seen some children who act wise beyond their years, and adults who act rather childish. I realized I was a good 16 years old in my emotional maturity most of the time in my marriage. You can't tell me what to do, yet I would just quietly seethe, choosing to be, quote, Christ-like. By the way, I later learned that Christ-like is not being defiant while seething. I remember as a 40-year-old middle-aged woman realizing I was advancing to young adult emotional maturity, age 21 maybe. Wow, I'm really progressing. Will I be 80 by the time I reach a 40-year-old maturity? To not take someone else's emotions on personally requires a high level of emotional intelligence, or EQ. What age do you feel like? I'm happy to report my husband has increased exponentially in his emotional maturity. Also, a fully emotional mature person can also cater to their playful and fun side more genuinely. Emotional maturity doesn't mean you give up childlike qualities. What can you do to grow up emotionally immature parts of you? Hopefully, my Love Zone marriage courses are teaching you just that. A great book I recommend is Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Bradbury Greaves and Lencioni. Well, as I read on one of those getting older birthday cards, if you haven't grown up by age 80, you don't have to. Next is disgust, a response to something offensive. To maintain safety, there is a place in emotional regulation for disgust. Contempt is disrespect mixed with disgust. The greatest predictor of divorce, according to John Gottman, world-acclaimed marriage researcher. The longer and more intimately you know someone, the more intimately you know that person's flaws and habits, and the easier it becomes to be intolerant of what you don't like. Contempt arises not from a one-time event, but from a stewing, smoldering accumulation of resentments over time. Too many disappointments, too much neglect, too many broken promises. When I think about disgust, I think about bodily fluids, what a spouse might be doing, things offensive to your values, like sexually, the inferior or superior dynamic that we might play of one up and one down. I don't know, think about it. Jabba the Hutt just disgusts me. Intimacy and disgust seem to be opposites. Into me see, and seeing so much, you don't like what you see. If you gaze into your lover's eyes and keep going deeply, and you start to see the veins in the eyes, and if you were able to go further, you would start to see whatever substance an eye is made up with, and all the grossness of the middle of the eye. Disgust is your writing a definition of what you feel is too much into me see, too much humanness, and not enough respect. Have you ever idolized or highly revered someone who you thought the world of, but when you searched further, you found they were quite normal and had their own flaws, and you felt a little let down? You might even say you experienced a little disgust that they weren't all you set them up to be. Even the most awesome of people sit on the toilet, right? I believe there's going too far in intimacy that doesn't allow for humanness, thus setting up failure and potential disgust, and a little one-uppedness that exacerbates the disgust once it's there. This may be where a little autonomy is in line, getting a little distance as needed from your spouse. Take a moment to ponder. When have you felt disgust towards someone, and what precipitated it? In your marriage, when has disgust shown up? What have you let it mean about your spouse or you? Do you want to keep that mindset of disgust or let it go? It really is serving you in some way, after all. It is a natural emotional response. Ponder for 3 minutes. What is your experience with disgust in your marriage? How can you see disgust mixed with contempt, a deadly poison in your marriage? We'll define the last emotion of joy as inner well-being satisfied. A Swedish proverb says, "Joy shared is joy doubled. Sorrow shared is sorrow halved." What this reminds me is that when I am open to others about my emotions and what's really going on, I live more emotionally stable, more in a place of joy. But as we've mentioned, not in over-empathy, not in jumping into the hole they're stuck in too. When you live true to yourself and you can't help but find joy in life, it serves those around you. Okay, unless you're overly giddy and gleeful, that gets old for sure. Paradoxically, joy isn't really the end destination. The human experience is reasonably based on opposition, the overcoming of opposition, the resultant joy. I'll talk more about the benefits of opposition in the Love Zone Marriage 10 course about overcoming conflict. Tamara Fackrell, divorce attorney and marriage researcher, says, "So let's say your marriage has been a struggle, but you don't want to give up. I have 2 words for you. Honor it. Take it as the classroom God has given you for your personal growth and do it well." Others struggle in a multiplicity of ways, from bad health of self or children to financial loss, and maybe this is your challenge. And if you stick with it, you can surely find true joy and lasting joy in marriage. I remember a lady I much admire giving a presentation at church, and here's what she asked. What if joy was a commandment of God? Because I believe it is. We are that we might have joy, she encouraged. What this means to me is that even though we know there will be daily and life experiences of opposition, not necessarily struggle, we can choose joy. Joy is inner well-being satisfied, an inner effort despite what's externally going on. And it's a journey, ever shifting. A person would do well to do an inventory of joy producers in their life. John Gottman suggests in marriage a 5-to-1 ratio of good to bad. Can you do that individually in life as well as a married couple? What produces joy for yourself, and what produces joy in your marriage? What arts or sports or leisure time activities do you like to do together? What media or hobby or study do you enjoy together? And of course, what physical intimacy brings you joy? What if joy was a commandment? What would you do differently or more of? Print out the accompanying joy JPEG slide or save it on your phone and put it where you'll see it often. Honoring emotions, expertly riding the wave. Remember stone face from the beginning of this course? When we push away from our emotions, we leave your psyche ripe for the numbing effects of stone face. So, are you a stuffer? One who stuffs stuff down? It's like a beach ball being submerged underwater until the energy needed to keep it under depletes and the ball pops back up to where it can be lighter in the air, usually haphazardly. Remember, emotions are energy in motion. They must have somewhere to go. You can let them go gracefully or let them have reckless energy that hurts you and others. Think on this one for a minute. What effects results from even stuffing good emotions? If you stuff happiness, joy, good surprise, and beneficial sadness, what can result? My first thought is anxiety, as there's nowhere for the good stuff to go. So when you stuff it, it morphs into something undesirable, like premonitions of what could now go wrong, because everything's been going so right. So you don't even appreciate the good stuff. Make sense? Well, what answers did you come up with? If we don't address our emotions, we repress them. If we don't express our emotions, we suppress them. My mentor, Jody Moore, says, we become exhausted when we disregard our emotions and what they are telling us. Do you ever just feel exhausted? You might think that that can only happen through something like running a marathon, but I believe many symptoms like anemia and chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and other diseases are from our not honoring what our emotions are telling us. And yet we try to plug along, pretending we are strong, avoiding the suppressed and the repressed. So, how can you honor your emotions? Well, I have 4 steps here. 1. Recognize your triggers. Start to notice what upsets you and gets your heart racing or gives you that exhausted feeling. 2. Understand your window of tolerance. If life overwhelms with various traumas, our window of tolerance, and that's what we can handle, gets much smaller. So things will set us off much easier than before. To increase our ability to handle triggers, we must learn to use healthy tools to work through the pain. 3. Find the message of the emotion. What is it instructing you to do differently? 4. Learn to listen to your inner voice. Oh, wow, did it take me a while to figure out what an inner voice was for me. When my sister asked me something about honoring my inner voice, I said, well, it feels like I'll step on her toes if I go in and try to take charge. And she said, well, then I would say that's a problem, because I would say that in my life, I knew that God knew better. And I had some issues with trying to think that I knew anything, but I found there is a place where only you know. And I talk more about this in Love Zone Marriage Course 1. The triggering event and the response gap. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and happiness. That's from Stephen R. Covey. Note, I have found that one of the best ways to practice the response gap is through meditation, which teaches the brain the response gap in moments of stress. We'll talk more about meditation later. Also, I have found that yoga slows down the mind and regulates its thinking through the natural response of the body. It syncs body and mind. One way to practice emotional regulation is through notice it, name it, flip it, find it. This is emotional processing taught to me from life-changing services. First of all, notice it. Notice the mood or feeling. Where is it in the body? This is in that response gap. Our body is creating chemicals. Think, nervous, excited, fearful. An immediate body response happens before we know it's happening. The chemicals are being activated. For sad, the chemicals might flood the brain to feeling more down, as if that was what the body needed to have to get its equilibrium. Name it. Name the emotion. Be familiar with the emotion wheel to have words for the feelings when it comes. Is it sad, lonely, abandoned? Look at this emotion wheel and become familiar. Do you see sad, lonely, abandoned? Or work it backwards. I'm feeling abandoned, and I think that's feeling lonely, and so I must be sad. You might think that this is weird to need to look at this wheel, but some people are very unaware of their emotions and just can't put their finger on it, and it's really helpful to be familiar with a wheel like this. You can find more online. There's many of these variations. Flip it is the next step. Flip the interpretation of the feeling or thought to truth. The more negative feelings grow, the more the brain energy moves from the frontal lobe, where we store and work from our values, toward the middle brain, more focused on survival, not truth. Is it really true that you're not enough, which is creating the chemicals for sadness? How about flip it to, I am just what I need it to be? And the next step, find it. Find the anchor in the new thought or reaction with a statement. Think of a dancer or a musician or someone in the military. They start slow, and then they start to learn the moves exactly, then advance until well practiced and quick at what they do. They get it so that it starts out slow, but by the time they've got it good, it's very well practiced. So here you could practice clear-headedness and patience and mental rewrites that you're going to bring to your mind. Find key phrases built upon true principles. Find mantras to go in the moment. Short power thoughts like, that's not who I am. Fear not, be of a good courage. Or, I keep my power. And then, after those 4 things, repeat. When worked over and over in a triggering situation, you NNFF. Notice it, name it, flip it, find it quickly until it's a supportive habit. Backseat driver emotions. Let's take the principal driver emotion of anger. The backseat driver emotions that fuel your angry driver are like secondary or soft emotions, like we already talked about in that first course with Amanda organizing her library and James with his beloved map file. These backseat driver emotions are in conflict. Everyone's saying their way is better, and you feel scattered and chaotic. They may cater to your sadness, your fear, and other emotions. Your background and past experiences feed the backseat drivers and muddle your thinking and emotions. Once you can notice it, name it, flip it, find it, you can start to make sense of what these emotions are telling you and who is really driving. You can start to think through why these backseat drivers have such an appealing story and advice. You can empower yourself by flipping your angry statement about what is wrong to writing a safety statement for helping the angry driver to make emotionally healthier choices moving forward. This statement is empowering, quieting the backseat drivers like, I was fearful growing up, but I don't need to be anymore. And the find it statement, I choose faith. Then decide what can be done to keep the driver empowered. This might take therapy, supportive friends, religious helps, exercise, fun hobbies, more self-help to appease the driver. Think about this. What does it take to calm you down when you've had a close call while you are driving? You already have an idea of how to take your power back. When you expertly drive as the authority in your life, you are able to maintain dignity in your life. You solidify that dignity through 1. Instituting boundaries, 2. Claiming and strengthening your sense of self, 3. Maintaining self-care so your backseat drivers can sit back and happily view the scenery or not even come along at all, And 4, seeking outside support to make sense of your experiences and not take it all out or be influenced in only one place. I talk about these 4 points in my other Love Zone marriage classes. But what if you are uncertain of that backseat driver emotion? Some people begin not very aware of what's going on inside, and they are easily reactive to those backseat emotions without a second thought. I know I have been unaware, and when I start to hear them whisper, I pull out my tools to stay in the driver's seat. One way I learned what the driver was hearing was to play the 5 why game. This is how it goes. I take the presenting feeling I'm experiencing, usually very basic, like anxious or annoyed, and ask myself, why am I feeling that way? Then I ask myself why I feel the first why. Now, often our brain will put up defenses and say, I don't know why, or just because I do. But be patient and sit a minute, letting the defensive brain calm down. Continue to ask why. If nothing is coming, sit down and write stream of thought, whatever is coming to mind, until a story or a situation comes to mind. Often something we'd like to entirely avoid. But let it come, let it show its face. Then keep asking why until you've come up with at least 5 answers. Searching into the subconscious is a bit like taking an elevator into lower levels from the main floor. You get into the elevator and you go down to the 4th floor and you think, oh, I don't know, I'm just feeling anxious. But when that door opens onto the 4th floor and you see what's on that level, you say, oh yeah, I remember when this happened that one time. And then you think, well, that's the end of that story. But you go back into the elevator, go down to the 3rd floor, the door opens and you say, oh yeah, and remember so-and-so was in the story too, and they really angered me or made me feel sad, whatever it might be. Until that basement floor level where you get there and you're like, oh man, I totally see why I am doing this. Why I'm feeling this way. Eventually you'll reach the softest emotion, oftentimes from childhood, and then you'll really feel it. And you'll understand why that service emotion is so triggering. In a moment, we'll delve more into the influence of our past on our emotions today through a helpful, if not life-changing meditation technique. So how can we support healthy emotions? One very easy way is to journal. Journal, just write about whatever you are having problems with, and you can even do a burn journal so you can just throw away that thing. I actually tried burning it on the grill, and my husband later found it and couldn't figure out why I had this burned black piece of paper on the grill. So after that, I just sort of tore it up and threw it away. Talking it out loud. Talk to someone about this. Let your emotions have air. EFT or EMDR. Meditation. Yoga, exercise, and sports. Playing an instrument, singing, listening to music are also helpful for your emotions. Healthy outlets, like a passion project of doing something that you just love to, that's exciting and makes the world a better place, which I use my passion project for what I'm doing right now with the Love Zone marriage classes. I love doing them, and I hope it's making a difference for others. Also, little things like essential oils or just going out into nature and just enjoying that for a little while. What else helps you support your healthy emotions? We seem to get busy in this world and think these small things are unimportant, but I can promise they will help you live a more full life as you allow the time and effort for them to influence you for the good. Even pick a few of these on this list and see how your emotions improve. As we honor our emotions, we can become open in new ways that become soul-stretching. Ultimately, we become more like the Savior, Jesus Christ, in favor with God and mankind by honoring emotions. Remember how Jesus showed anger at the money changers in the temple. Jesus cried sadness when he heard of the deaths of loved ones like Lazarus, who he later raised from the dead. Jesus spoke in disgust to the Pharisees of their selfish ways, calling them vipers. Jesus experienced joy at his triumphal entry, riding a donkey with palm fronds waved at him. And here's something interesting. I've never read any kind of a scripture that describes Jesus as having fear. So that would be one emotion to learn to live without through faith and love and trust in God. As we share and process sadness, fear, disgust, and anger, we can also find joy. A well-lived life escalates in a perpetual upward trajectory made of lots of little waves of good and bad. Take this challenge. Do NNFF. Notice it, name it, flip it, find it, with a particular emotion you feel in the near future. And also think, what is a past situation you did something different because you honored or maintained dignity of your emotions? Congratulate yourself. Following is a meditation, the inner child meditation, which only takes 7 minutes, but can be life-changing. And after this, we will talk about honesty. And what does honesty have to do with emotions and emotions in marriage? We'll see you there.
Inner child meditation. Find a comfortable place to sit or lay down. Get comfortable. Close your eyes. Relax. Breathe deeply. Relax. Let go of any tension you feel in your neck, in your jaw, in your tongue. Release any tenseness behind your knees or in your stomach. Let your shoulders go. Breathe deeply. Just let go. Think of that thing that bothers you. That thing that gets you every time. You are reactive to this thing, and sometimes it doesn't even make sense the way you react. It seems to go in a cycle. It bothers you at times you wish it wouldn't. It's always there, ready to pounce at the least trigger. What is that thing? When was the very first time you remember experiencing that thing? Go back in time. When was the first time? Don't overthink it. And if you can't think of the very first time, think of the worst time. Think of yourself in that situation at that time, the first or the worst, but preferably the first. Think of that little girl, or whatever age she was. We'll assume little. What age was she? Where was she? Who was with her? What was happening around her? Can she remember any of the smells or sounds going on at this time? Can you remember what she was wearing? Think of those details for a moment. You are going to visit that little girl in your current wholeness. Tell her she's all right now in this situation, that you are there with her. She's all right. You are there with her in all your current power and knowledge and experience. Tell her that everything turns out all right, that it's turning out just right. Ask her to forgive anyone that helped cause the feelings she's feeling. They were just doing their best and have their own healing angels to use. And she has any number of angels she wants also at her service. Ask what feeling she'd really like to have. Have her hold that feeling in her two hands in front of her. Can she feel it in the two hands in front of her? And she pulls it into her heart. It becomes her. Remind her that experiences help us and we can be grateful for them, because it really does turn out all right. Tell her she can go with you if she wants. She doesn't have to, but you're there for her. Take a deep breath, in and out. Now think of a calming place. Imagine all the senses experiencing perfect calmness in this place. What is around you? What are you smelling, or seeing, or hearing, or touching? Everything is perfect around you, from the weather to whatever is beneath you, to whatever feeling you want to have. This is your safe place, and you can return here anytime you want. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Enjoy this new calm.
I finished the last section with an inner child meditation for a reason. I wanted you to see how things that make up who we are from our past as emotionally manifested in our marriages today. And the funny thing is that we blame our spouses for things they supposedly provoke us, created by that which happened before we even met our spouse. They aren't responsible for our monsters from the past. And now I want to talk honestly about honesty. I never realized how intimately honesty and emotions were linked in marriage. I've always considered myself an honest person. I didn't hold back with my kids on Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. I paid the late fees I could have ignored, and I honestly told my husband the positive truth. I always considered myself an honest person until I realized how disguisedly deceitful I lived. But in a way, I've been forever deceitful. I always told people I was fine, and I served others in ways I absolutely didn't want to, but I told them, it's my pleasure. My dishonesty didn't click for me until I realized I always drove 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. I was dishonestly breaking the very laws of the land knowingly. But what time savings am I trying to force anyway? If I call myself an honest and an obedient person but fail to keep the law of driving the posted speed limit, I am actually not obedient. You might say, it's not that big of a deal. Everyone drives 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. But what about all those little ways we lie, stacked up over time? As I said, I always honestly told my husband the positive truth, but never the negative truth, which was lying. Let me share with you this little comic book I compiled when I realized my habitual lying. The Grown-Up Children's Book of Honesty: How We Unknowingly Deceive in Our Pride to Keep Peace. So here is the woman, and she's cooking stuff in the kitchen, and her child is on the floor playing video games. And he asks, "Mama, do you love me?" She says, "Of course I do." But what she's really thinking, what is really her truth, is, when you get good grades, get a soccer goal, and get along with your siblings, then I love you. She's out walking with her friends, and they ask her, "Don't you love the new movie at the theater this week?" She says, "Oh, yes." But the truth, actually, I thought it was rather trite, a waste of my time. She's sitting on the couch with her husband, who asks, "You'd like to go with me to the football game, right?" She says, "Sure, honey." Truth, I can actually think of 100 ways I'd rather spend my time. She's talking to her neighbor across the fence. She exaggerates. "She got at least 15 bruises, sent her right to the ER." Truth, it was only 3 bruises, and it was only the urgent care center. Her son has just broken her vase with a baseball bat. She says, "It's not that big of a deal." Truth, this was my only inheritance from Grandma Gertrude. Priceless. She's shopping with her daughter, who holds up a holy pair of jeans, and she says, "No, I'm not angry you buy pants with holes in them if you like them." Truth, why don't you buy jeans at a yard sale and rip them up? Or better yet, earn those holes through working in the yard. She's at work, and her boss is pointing down at her accusingly. She says, "That can't be my mistake. I wouldn't be so careless." Truth, that could have been my mistake, but no way am I owning up to it. She's bringing a loaf of bread to a sick neighbor. They thank her, and she says, "Oh, it was no problem. I just hope you get feeling better." Truth, I slaved all day over that bread, messing up one batch, and I think I'm coming down with something myself. She's walking to the grocery store, and this pyramid of apples falls. She says, "Must have been that older lady behind me." Truth, I made that stack fall, but no way am I going to fess up. I won't be seen as that clumsy. She's just got a new interesting haircut, and she says, "Everyone has this hairstyle nowadays. I love it." Truth, I look like a porcupine stuck its finger in a light socket, but it's the rage. And then she says, with this Pinocchio nose on her face, "I would never lie." She'd never break the 8th commandment, right? Bearing false witness? As I realized I only told the truth when I didn't ruffle any feathers, I saw how difficult it is to fight surfacing emotions that could put you in an unsafe place in many ways, emotionally, physically, financially, socially, spiritually. Jennifer from Mason 5 says, "Truth is not easy. You have to face the disorganization and the disequilibrium of finding out what is true, which can be messy. But I have found when you learn to be honest despite the discomfort of possible emotions doing so might bring up, it can foster great intimacy or intimacy. To see and to be seen. I most easily find this explained through the real love concept. My eyes were opened as I studied the real love philosophy by Greg Bear. Look at this pattern. Truth leads to seen, leads to understood, leads to loved. Truth. Tell the truth to be seen. When you are seen, you are understood. When you are truly understood, you can't help but be loved. Even villains with the worst of intentions are usually found to have sound reasons for what they do, usually from some instance in childhood. I find it more and more fascinating to hear people's stories and piece together why it is they do what they do. I recently heard somebody say, if you were to get in a car with somebody else that you didn't know and you drive across the country with them and you talked back and forth the whole time, you would not be able to not love that person by the time you got to the end of the country. And isn't that true that when we are telling the truth and are seen and are understood, that we can't help but be loved? What I ultimately learned from the real love philosophy was that unabashed truth is the foundation to unconditional loving. We use getting and protecting behaviors, according to Greg Bear, to fill the space of where we're not receiving true love or real love. These getting and protecting behaviors are 1, lying in order to be accepted, 2, attacking, using fear to get what we want, 3, running so others don't see who we really are, 4, acting like a victim to get sympathy in our falsehood, and 5, clinging, hanging on to something to get something. You can see in here the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn patterns of trauma, can't you? Think, are you guilty of these things? Do you honestly see yourself in any of this? Pause for a moment and think about that. Here are some of the ways Bear says we lie. We tell others about our accomplishments, but not our flaws. We communicate positive feelings that are not true. Yes, I love that dress. Change our physical appearance to attract others to us, and tell others what they want to hear so they'll like us. Getting and protecting behaviors are generally selfish and create more getting and protecting behaviors, which brings us fake or imitation love. There are 4 types of imitation love. These are found in any way we try to use 1, praise, 2, power, 3, pleasure, and 4, safety to get what we want. Imitation love gives us temporary relief from our pain and emptiness, and it works in the short term. But you cannot have lying and intimacy. And when they are used to get something, you are being deceitful. There are 5 parts to real love. First of all, be quiet. Do not speak when you are overly emotional. Find a place of calmness before communicating. 2, be wrong. Be open to another interpretation. See how you could be wrong here. 3, feel loved. When you feel genuinely accepted, not threatened, you can take on emotion from others without defensiveness. But this requires getting loved. The 4th point. Tell the truth about yourself to others and get and replenish self-love. This is usually not from your spouse initially. You already have experience that hasn't been working if you're considering the points of real love. I like to think of a favorite aunt. If you have a favorite aunt or someone in your family who you can go to and you can tell anything to them and you know that no matter what, they are going to love you. This is receiving of real love. And most marriages, according to Greg Bear, do not have real love. The 5th point, be loving. Practice. Find gradual change in your ability to love. Practice being loving. I believe it's important to create opportunities to know and be open and genuine, to be seen. This means scheduling times to be together to know and know each other, being willing to share and learn through dates with your spouse, getaways, regular check-ins, how's everything going? As Greg Bear asserts, with real love, nothing else matters. Without it, nothing else is enough. Sometimes I might bite my tongue to not say something because it might cause damage or rejection or emotions I can't handle. But we break rules of self-integrity by sidestepping honesty to feel positive emotions instead of negative emotions. I don't care what Brene Brown says about vulnerability, but my hero and redeemer, Jesus Christ, I have never seen as vulnerable. I can accept the word open, and I can be willing to share of myself, warts and all. What about the shaming parts of me, or what I perceive as secret, can't tell anybody? Well, shame and secrets love to hide, and if they are aired with somebody you know and can trust, I believe good and truth will result. We sometimes get stuck in lies we can't see for what they really are. When I talk to my husband with real love, I say, "This is how I'm feeling. You may see it differently, and I am okay if you have a different viewpoint. I still love you." And then I tell myself, "And I still love you too." Remember, love rejoiceth in the truth, found in 1 Corinthians. There is a balance between knowing where honesty will serve you best. It's communicating in a way that keeps you together without continual stuffing or overreacting. I believe honesty with self parallels honesty with others, which means you both get the goods when you are real and genuine in an uplifting way. Have you ever thought about how people pleasers are actually liars? They tell others what others want to hear, truth or not, and they lie to themselves. They lie to themselves in that they will do anything, even against their values, to make them okay with the other person. I know this from past personal experience. It has taken me a while to learn how to carefully tell the truth, or see where I need internal processing to match what I say and think. As a side note, you can't be codependent or only okay if others are okay, and be honest with yourself. You are ignoring your thoughts and needs and only working in the best interest of the other. Do you remember that Seinfeld episode where George meets a beautiful lady in a cafe and she's surprised that they both ordered the same lunch? We as the audience laugh as he immediately states, "My name is George. I'm unemployed and live with my parents." Instead of being turned off by his honesty, she turns to him in interest, and they later become an item. Maybe George was a welcome surprise to be honest and probably unlike most men this lady ever met. There is a balance, though, between what you tell and what you don't tell in your marriage. What is lying and what is just better kept to yourself. There was a story about a man who was going to therapy with his wife, and the therapist encouraged this man, "Tell the truth. Just tell your wife the truth." So they went home and he told her, "I prefer your sister over you." Well, of course, she was terribly offended, and the next time they went back to the therapist, and the therapist said, "Are you telling the truth?" to the man said, "Yes, I am." And the wife said, "He said that he prefers my sister to me." But the guy said, "I was just being honest." A little bit too much information there. But then you also need to have differentiation. Honesty does not mean that you have to tell all. Like some couples and therapists think, sometimes we need differentiation by not sharing things that don't matter in the relationship. We need productive honesty that creates further knowing. One of my mentors, I think this is a funny situation, that she actually became a millionaire and had never told her husband. And her husband decided he didn't like his job anymore, and he came to her and he said, "Well, I think I'm going to get another job." And she said, "I can hire you. Do you want a job from me?" And he became her IT tech person. So she hadn't even told him that she'd become a millionaire. And they were both okay with that. It was okay. She didn't need to tell him everything. When you are open, honest, and seen and heard for who you really are, there is no reason to be unreasonably, emotionally reactive. We can't heal what we can't reveal. When you are truthful with one another about your thoughts and feelings, you are more open and likely to be loved. When you are less truthful, the other person is more dissuaded and defensive, even if it's in spirit or vibe or body language you might emit, which can be confusing when not being truthful. When I am honest and less reactive, I am able to keep a good spirit with me. If I am loving my husband as myself, understanding his emotions are his and mine are mine, I maintain dignity and keep God's spirit with me. Heaven knows I need the same grace back from my husband for my weaknesses. Here's a little activity. Have an honest conversation with your spouse. Consider a recent argument, but not one too serious, and say what really hurt. It's amazing how free you feel when expressing yourself and living in truth. You know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Remember stone face. I notice stone face in my life when I am not letting myself feel emotions, not being true to myself, caring so much about the other people around me that I don't want to upset anything, so I implode. Giving into addiction and trauma and isolating tendencies, letting my past rule me in the present. On my scale of threes, you'll see here, stone face resides at -3. -3 is where you survive, numb, or the opposite, overly anxious, and probably wavering back and forth depending on the freedom you feel to allow anxiety, but stomping emotion back into stone face because it's easier to not feel the anxiety. You are prone to addictions, living in trauma responses, backed up against a wall with nowhere to go. You are a prisoner, not in control of yourself, it seems. You live in fear, and fear has shut you down. It's a godless place to exist. As you pull out of this gray place through awareness that you are even there and find resources for something better, you pull out of compulsivities and thanklessness to a place of willingness, even if willing to simply now be a victim instead of a prisoner, and faith in something more than what you now have. This is striving, ground zero. You are out of the dungeon and on the flatlands. At striving, you are willing to be different, uncomfortable, accepting what is instead of just stuffing it. This is moving toward a natural progression that represents who you really are. It is accepting more generosity with self and others, experiencing more abundance, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, socially, more producing what you want, more fondness in your life. You find things that work, that allow you to be truly yourself. You discover productive self-care like exercise, sunshine in the outdoors, uplifting music, meditating and grounding, healthy touch, connecting relationships, laughter, serving others because you have enough to give. At 3+ on the scale, you find that everything is conspiring in your favor, even if you might not have agreed at all at -3. You are thriving. This is on top of that mountain. You function in love and creating, the master of your existing. With your awareness, willingness, and acceptance, you can recognize when you begin to slip backwards. You see that you no longer create. You fight discomfort instead of growing with it. You complain, blame, shame, and fear more. But if you can recognize this slip backward into stone face or surviving at -3, if you can realize the chemicals unhealthy emotions are emitting, like adrenaline and other stress hormones, and you respond in that gap after stimulus, you can stop the backward slide in its tracks. You can do those things that create healthy chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin through positive helps, as listed on the right side of this chart. And paradoxically, you can use what can be considered unhealthy emotions to fight back in a good way. Fighting might represent what a mother would do for her child in danger, but extended for a worthy cause that benefits mankind on a fairly long-term basis. Maybe she becomes an advocate for stopping human trafficking. Compulsivity becomes committed when that energy is channeled into helping others who struggle with addiction. Lies turned around to honesty and integrity morph into something that might help a therapist facilitate huge change in herself or her clients. Determined and enduring help win the race for a good cause, one that keeps feeding the will to live in the place of everything conspiring in my and your favor. They say there are 5 fears of emotional intimacy. 1, the fear of abandonment. 2, the fear of merger or losing independence. 3, the fear of being seen or known. 4, the fear of attack, and all included in that the fear of contention, which I would say that I suffered from, not wanting to do anything that created any kind of contention, whether it was in my best interest or not. And 5, fear of your own destructive tendencies. Those 5 fears are cited from the Center for Thriving Relationships. Which of these 5 fears would you suffer from or have suffered from? What was the situation with the presenting fears? When have these shown up in marriage? Where would you say you were on the scale of 3s? I know I've felt all of these fears in my marriage at one point or another. Can you see how claiming your own power, loving more unconditionally, and trusting a greater power than your own squashes them out? Now let me add a caution. I have found that sometimes we aren't just suffering a particular emotion in a relationship, but we may have an emotional hook from them. This was an entirely new concept to me, but one of which I fell prey. I talk in Love Zone Marriage 8 about emotional hooks in my experience with someone I call Indie X. For now, just be aware that if you have an emotion that just won't leave you, you may require some deep emotional shifting and forgiving to rewrite that subconscious boulder. As I've taught in this course, I believe that overcoming fears in relationships happens best through honestly opening yourself to know and be known, honoring and processing your emotions, practicing faith, and living in real love. C.S. Lewis said, "Now faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods. For moods will change whatever view your reason takes. This rebellion of your moods against your real self is going to come anyway. That is why faith is such a necessary virtue. Unless you teach your moods where they get off, you are just a creature dithering to and fro, with its beliefs really dependent on the weather and the state of its digestion. Consequently, one must train the habit of faith." That's from Mere Christianity. Just like we train our emotions, we parallel that training with increasing our faith. Faith in ourselves, faith in others, faith in God, to the result of love of all. +3 on the scale of 3s. Everything we experience thriving, conspiring in our favor. Your 5 stories activity. The following activity is like a capstone project to this course. It will help you know and grow yourself in eye-opening and enlightening new ways. I can pretty much guarantee it. And I'm going to be honest here. If done well, this is going to take you more than a quick minute, but it can be a huge game changer in harnessing your emotional regulation. And it's fun. So get a binder, one you love, like the favorite color you like the most, and divide it into 5 sections. First of all, who I am. Gather pictures, letters, and cards, inspiring thoughts, receipts, like to awesome places, magazine cutouts, artwork, memories, loves, affirmations, songs, representations of your unique self that purely represents who you are. Don't skimp, and continue to add to it regularly. The purpose of Who I Am section, to remind you of your true identity. Second section is a burn journal. Add loose pages to this section to dump all the negativity in your mind. Get it all out. If you are improving in life, you will encounter mental roadblocks. So let go of whatever builds up and needs outlet. Don't withhold, but don't let anyone else see it either. Burn it if it's easy, or tear it up and throw it away. Letting anyone else see this ain't going to do anybody any good, and physically parting with what you've written figuratively allows its demise. Do this often, even nightly if possible, or other methods for dumping at the end of the day, like you'll find at the end of my Love Zone Marriage 7 class about changing thoughts for mental safety. The purpose of the burn journal? To honor and let go of unuseful emotions. Really, you should only ever have empty paper in this section. When the dumping turns to positive, which it usually eventually does, you want somewhere memorable to store those new thoughts. After the purging becomes the available space for learning, which is the third section. Learning. Record truths you discover about yourself, where you are in your journey, thoughts and information helpful to you to refer back to. Your burn journal writing from the last section might go from, It feels like I'm never enough and it's so-and-so's fault. 2. I will take power of my life. I am the master. God put me here for a reason, and I discover that reason daily. And this is, in the learning section, where you document that part. The learning section opens your mind with new possibility, allowing a space for inner wisdom and the voice of the Spirit of truth. This is organized space for you to determine and discover what God already knows. And you forge ahead on the journey of co-creating with Him. The purpose of the learning section? Feed the brain with truth. Fourth, the dreaming section. At the beginning of this section, add pictures of your biggest desires and dreams to the first pages. Dream big. It should feel so big it feels barely out of reach. But let's be honest, not so big it would take too many miracles. Be realistically but dreamingly big, and represent it pictorially. My first dream in my dream section was a picture of my playing with a piano quartet. My ultimate goal was to play on stage in front of a live audience with a group like this. 2 people at 2 pianos, a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 hands. With the goal on paper, I tried to really feel it in the many senses. From the smell of the wooden piano parts, the touch of the ivory piano keys beneath my fingers, to the sound of the audience clapping along, to the feeling of the 4 of us bowing together and my asking myself, are my shoes tied? Yes, they are, and rising. The taste of the thrill of performance, imagination gone wild. My husband took the picture of the actual event, which was us playing at a local Independent Day patriotic program, 3 other fabulous musicians, and me feeling like I was not worthy to play along with them, but doing it anyway. And many more pictures imagined and later realized on the following pages of this dreaming section. After these dreaming big pictures in this section, list your goals. Daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, plus 1 5-year goal in the 5 areas of emotional, social, intellectual, physical, and spiritual. I then transfer these goals to a memo app on my phone where I can refer to them often. The purpose of the dreaming section? To personally empower. 5th section, the gratitude or the SOG, that is, saw the hand of God section. This is all the ways that God blesses your life. There's a reason gratitude is at the end. Firstly, because it's super easy to flip to the back and record without a lot of searching through the sections. But most importantly, because gratitude is of the highest energy emotions. It literally helps you manifest into existence the thing you want, handed to you like on a golden platter, maybe after some decent effort. And if it doesn't present to you in that way, it was never meant to be. So either release that thing, which will be easier and easier to discern what to release or not, or shelve it, perhaps expecting it at some point in the future. Gratitude at the end of this binder seals up your work with what you want infused throughout the rest of the pages. I open a space through these pages that through God's miracles, even greater things than I can dream up can come to pass, which is now a regular occurrence to me in my life. I've had positions and opportunities opened up to me that are just greater than what I could have imagined possible. So list any and all the ways you see God's hand in your life and sit in that thankful attitude for a moment or 2 each night. Let your brain mull on it while you sleep and follow the inspiration in the morning. Purpose of the gratitude or saw the hand of God section? SPOG. Spiritually influence yourself through a power greater than your own. These 5 sections manage and regulate emotions. Their purposes recapped to 1. Remind you of your true identity. 2. Honor and release unuseful emotions. 3. Feed the brain with truth. 4. Personally empower you. And 5. Spiritually influence yourself through a power greater than your own. I don't see how you could not affect your emotions for the greater through the practice of your 5 stories. Keep this 5 stories binder somewhere easy to refer to often. I keep mine in my nightstand next to my bed. Expand as needed. Each section for me are now in their own binders in my nightstand. Easy to pull out and capture. Make sure you include, this is the dream one, and here's the gratitude side of the hand of God. I've expanded. Make sure to include what you want in your marriage in each of the sections of this binder. Shoot for the stars and watch it happen. I mentioned at the very first of this course Amanda, who fixed up her dream library by using the Marie Kondo method for tidying up, otherwise known as the KonMari philosophy, found at KonMari.com. One of the biggest inspirations I learned from the KonMari method, aside from the fabulous advice to keep that which sparks joy, is something I mentioned throughout my various classes for a reason. Whatever your mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. From Napoleon Hill. Ultimately, what I learned about cleaning and organizing my house applies to marriage too. There's an ultimate end for which we aspire, our privilege to make that end transpire. By organizing my house away from its piles and stacks, I wanted instead good smells in my clean house, breathtaking music, and gorgeous flowers on the table. I wanted a contented and happy feel in my house, and I wanted a similarly fashioned marriage. Goodness, clean, breathtaking, gorgeous, contented, and happy. So I had to see it and create it. That ultimate end becomes more and more a reality with each passing day. In every way, I claim my power, envision my hopes, share the best of me in relationships, and allow God as a co-creator in my life. I hope the same of all of that for you, too.